April 14th. We're here at the Atlanta History Center. My name is Tony Hilliard, and we're interviewing Mr. Charles Bishop, a Vietnam veteran for the Library of Congress Veterans Oral History Program. Would you please tell us your name and give us your address?
Right. My name is Charles Bishop.
When were you born?
I was born 23 October 1945 in Marietta, Georgia.
Marietta, Georgia. Okay. Can you give us a little bit of your life history prior to coming into the service?
Grew up in Marietta. Went to Marietta High School. Graduated from there. Went to North Georgia College up in Lange, Georgia. It's one of the military colleges in the United States, 7 military colleges. Went into the ROTC program. That's primarily why I chose it, because I knew I was going to make the Army a career. Was a distinguished military graduate from North Georgia, and entered the service on 4 June 1967.
Okay. Was that, were you commissioned?
Commissioned as second lieutenant infantry in the Army, and was then off on my military career. Basically was immediately reported to Fort Benning for 5 weeks of infantry officer basic. I was a distinguished military graduate, so they took all the DMGs and they shortened their infantry officer basic from 8 weeks to 5 weeks because they needed troops. We checked out of IOBC, infantry officer basic, in the morning, and checked into Ranger in the afternoon in July. 2 months of Ranger school, finished that up in September. Graduated from Ranger, actually at Field 7 in Eglin Air Force Base, but was brought back to Fort Benning. We checked out of the Ranger Department in the morning, checked into Airborne in the afternoon. 3 weeks of Airborne, and then when that was over, in the middle of October, or 1st of October, got a little bit of leave for 2 weeks, and then reported to my first assignment, which was as a platoon leader in the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
And what year was this?
This was 1967, October 1967.
Okay. So how long were you at Fort Campbell?
We were at Fort Campbell only for basically 2.5 months. We were deployed from Fort Campbell as the rest of the division. 1st Brigade was already in Vietnam. I was in the 2nd Brigade. I was in platoon leader, 2nd Platoon, D Company, 1st Battalion, 501st Infantry, Geronimo, 2nd Brigade, the 101st, and we deployed on the 13th of December to Vietnam.
The 501st was the regiment for the Band of Brothers?
No, I think the I think it was the other brigade. I think it was like 506th.
Okay.
Was a Band of Brothers. 501st was their motto is Geronimo, because it traced their lineage back to the test platoon for Airborne back in 1940, and so they were the every regiment has a motto, and ours is the Thunderbird insignia with Geronimo underneath it. So
okay.
That's the first. There are usually 2 battalions per brigade, or or 2 battalions for each regiment, and 1st and 2nd were the ones for the 501st. 2nd Brigade was made up of 1 501, 1 502, and 2 502. Okay. So I'm not sure where 2 501 was. It might have been in part of the 1st Brigade, but I'm not sure.
So you deployed to Vietnam as a unit?
Yes. Okay. The 1st Brigade was already in there. It had been there since 1965. And as the buildup of troops in 1967 was going, they decided to deploy the other 2 brigades of the 101st. So on the 13th of December, all of the 2nd and 3rd brigades, which would be about 8,000 to 10,000 people, and I thought it was kind of ironic, C-141s that were built in Marietta, Georgia, my hometown, took us out of Campbell Army Airfield at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We flew through Anchorage, where I can remember that being really, really cold while we were refueling at Anchorage. We stayed on the airplanes, but it was just bitterly cold. And the next stop was Vietnam. We landed at Benoit, and as the clamshells opened at the back and the ramp came down, you were just immediately oppressive heat and humidity just washed over you. And it was just amazing to me.
So that was your first impression?
Oh, absolutely. It was like just a blanket being thrown over you because of the humidity. Then the base camp for the 101st originally was at Benoit, and we stayed there. We moved out from Benoit to the 25th Infantry Division, Kuchi, Vietnam, and worked there with them from the time we arrived in December through late January. And it was kind of like on-the-job training for us to go out. We were with, I believe it's the 1st of the 27th, the Wolfhounds, and we would go on patrols with them, and we would work with them in that area, and we would actually run our own training in that area. It's the Iron Triangle, the defoliated area that they had, where all the tunnels were near Kuchi, and we would actually run operations in that area, and it's sort of a warm-up for things we were going to do. Our brigade moved north in late January. I believe we went north on the 30th of January, flew by C-130 to the Hue Phu-Bai Airport near Hue, south of Hue, and then trucked through Hue, and I think I still have some pictures of snapped as we were going on a truck convoy through Hue and up to our area, which is just south of Quang Tri, a place called LZ Jing, outside of a little town called Hai Lang on Highway 1. And we got in there very late in the evening, about 5, 6 o'clock, and we were occupying, the LZ Jane had been a 1st Cavalry Division, LZ, and so we occupied that on that night. And we had to occupy their fighting positions, or holes that they had dug, the foxholes they'd dug. And they put them, in our opinion, way too far down the slope of the hill. And we had positions for our machine gun positions and our riflemen, but platoon sergeant and each of our RTOs, the 4 of us, had just a small hole about maybe 8 inches deep and about 6 feet long and about 4 feet or 5 feet wide, just enough that you could sort of just get yourself down below the cover of the ground, but not room for our equipment like our packs and our radios and things like that. So we were all sleeping around the 4 sides of the hole, and that night was the night Tet began. And we got awakened kind of about 3 o'clock in the morning to the sound of RPGs exploding on our hillside. And,
so they knew you were there?
Oh, they knew that somebody was going to be in LZ Jane, and we were just part of the overall offensive that night across the entire Vietnam.
So how long had you been in country when that took place?
We've been there about a month and a half.
Okay.
And but we just, like I say, just deployed to this area up north, and it was our real first combat that we'd had. We really hadn't engaged anybody down around the Kuchi area, and that night they hit my side of the perimeter, they hit my platoon's sector of the perimeter, and they hit on the other side of the perimeter Lieutenant Rector's sector of, I believe Rector was in C Company. And they had wire strung in front of them. They had some concertina wire, at least one strand, one roll of concertina wire, which sort of hampered the people moving into their sector. But my sector, we didn't have anything, and they were shooting RPGs literally at our hillside and exploding them. And they threw satchel charges into one of my machine gun hole that I had, and wounded my 4 people in my machine gun hole. Nobody was killed that night. I got wounded that night because I was reaching up for the radio outside the hole. As I put my hand up, I got hit in the hand and arm, and so that was my introduction to combat. Was almost immediately one of the first people wounded, but not badly. So, but that was the first Purple Heart. So,
so how long did you stay in that position?
Well, we that night went by. I was talking to my OP observation post. It was out. We were on a slope, and there was a little bit of a finger that went out, and then a small valley to the left side of that. That apparently was where the VC had partly come into the area. They had actually gotten inside the perimeter and blew some other things up inside the wire, inside the perimeter. And now they were exfiltrating out through that, and I was trying to get my OP to engage them, and they were a little bit afraid to throw grenades and things on them. But anyway, they exfiltrated. We killed 2 in front of our position. Found them the next morning. But we actually, as they started firing, we fired back and threw grenades and so on, and had killed 2 with hand grenades during the night. And so we found their bodies the next morning. But we were just there we were going to stay in LZ Jane for, I think we stayed in LZ Jane maybe for about a month, working out of that base camp, that fire base. The next morning, I was taken off to where the battalion aide was, and just basically had my wounds, had frag in near my elbow and my hand. Got them disinfected, debrided, and the bandages put on them, and came right back. So I was back by about 10 o'clock that morning, and that's how we were cleaning up the folks in front of our position and burying the enemy dead there. And then we moved our positions further up the hill, like and set up real fighting positions like we knew we were supposed to set up, not just regular foxholes.
Was anything else at the LZ? I mean, was there artillery there?
We had all the battalions of the company, 4 companies of infantry, and there was an artillery battery inside the perimeter. And we worked then from that LZ, working out along the road that went back to the town of Lange. And the next morning we had to actually, 2 companies went down to Lange because there was a North Vietnamese weapons company occupying that town, and their job was to throw them out. And eventually it became a 4 company action that day. But I remember that was the first day I'd seen American dead was in that fight, was for Lange. And we came in from the southwest of the town. And I can still remember a first Cav H-13 helicopter, pilot and a gunner. And the gunner seeing us and with his machine gun immediately starting to fire into our area, and then we had to duck for cover to keep from getting shot by our own people, which was a continuous problem in Vietnam, and it's a continuous problem now, friendly fire. So, but I mean, it's just one of the problems with combat. And we were not able to throw them out of the town immediately, and so we had to pull back and cordon the town and dig in that night outside the town, and then we fought the town for about 2 days. And I remember being, our company was, I was in D company, and I remember our company had been moved to the north side of the town, and one of those vivid memories that you still have is of Navy F-4s swooping out of it was a heavy overcast, about 250, 300 feet, and you'd hear the sound of a jet, and then suddenly a jet would just pop down out of the overcast long enough to come over your heads and then right into the town, drop his bombs, and disappear back up into the overcast again. It's still one of those most vivid memories I can have. So just a kind of a surreal sight to see that big gray F-4 up there, and it stayed there, he drops his bomb, and he's gone. So also one of the things we had that day was, again, a friendly fire incident where, again, on the north side, they were firing artillery from LZ Jane, or from one of the LZs, I'm not sure it was LZ Jane, but they made a mistake on their deflection arrow, and they managed to put a round right near one of my people and wounded one of my guys with artillery shards in the arm, and lost one of my people to friendly fire again. So a lot of friendly fire incidents that you just war zone's a hazardous place to be. So we basically would patrol the road between LZ Jane and the town of Lange. Eventually either the enemy just moved off or we'd moved him off. And now we patrolled Highway 1 and that road that led in, which was our main supply route into the LZ.
How long was that? What distance was that?
Well, it's probably about maybe 10, 12 kilometers. It was not that far, maybe 4 or 5 miles. But I remember having my platoon one time having to be strung out at 2 or 3 man size elements that were just sort of in visual each other, sort of strong pointing that road to make sure it was secure, make sure nobody put any bombs or mines on the road, and we would have to strong point the road.
Overnight?
No, just during the day. During the day, but that was kind of if you're out there, you're with 2 or 3 man, basically observation post. You're in sight of each other, but if somebody came up in strength, you would be kind of alone. So it was a little bit risky, but that was what they had us. That was our mission. They wanted us to do, and so we did that one. But, I can still remember one of the other incidents here. These are kind of flashback kind of things, or vivid memory of some of those helpless feelings and a little bit of humor too. Of standing up on one of our bunkers. We finally built overhead bunkers with sandbags and so on. And we're on LZ Jane, and company commander had the FO was firing in what were called final protective fires. He would fire an air burst, and then he would adjust it and then he would know where it was going to land if we had to fire, if the enemy was coming in waves towards us. And the FO was firing the and all of a sudden we hear this behind us, this big whoomph, and turn around and watch a Jeep do about a up and then back down. The company commander looks at the FO and kind of quizzically like, "What did you do that for?" The FO shakes his head, "Sir, that wasn't one of mine." About that time, we all dive for the bunkers, and now it's a 122 millimeter rocket attack that's coming into the LZ, and that was pretty well targeted. And that's the most helpless feeling in the world, because all you can do is lay there and just wait and hope they don't hit your bunker, because you're pretty safe in the bunker unless you get a direct hit. So, never had a direct hit one of those, so that was kind of fortunate there. Like I say, we stayed in. I'm not sure exactly how long we stayed there, maybe 2-3 weeks, but then we were patrolling an area. Our company basically would get an AO, or area of operations, and just run circuit through that AO, and it was sort of like going around it several times. And our area was out near east of Highway 1 in an area that was designated as Highway 555, or the Triple Nickel. If you ever read Bernard Fall's book, The Street Without Joy, that was the Street Without Joy, that the area they were working in, same place the French paratroopers had worked in 1952. So we were working the Triple Nickel area, and my company commander for D Company was Captain Guy Holland, who had had 2 Special Forces tours, so he was well experienced. As we're working the way this was set up, the Highway 1, then a whole lot of rice paddies, then there would be a little strip of village area, and then a big sand dune, and then sand dunes that rolled off to the east till they hit the actual South China Sea. And as we would sweep down south into this village area, the Viet Cong was about a Viet Cong squad, maybe 10, 12 people. And every once in a while, we never knew when, they would engage us, and they would fire, and they would hit us, and then they would just run. So we did that for a couple of days, and then on, I guess it was morning of, we'd done this over about a 4-day period, 5-day period. They'd hit us a couple of times like that. Captain Holland decided the next day that probably one of the days they would come back to try to harass us again. So he sent the first platoon out into the sand dunes, and then told them to come south and set up a blocking position about 1,000 meters, a kilometer south into the area, the built-up area, and face north. And then third platoon swept down through the built-up area, and I swept down through the sand dunes. I was leading, they were echelon behind me, third platoon was echelon behind me. Sure enough, third platoon got shot at, we got shot at on the ridge, and the guys broke contact with us and then immediately started running south and ran right into our blocking force, who managed to kill a couple of them at that point. And we didn't get harassed very much by the VC anymore after that. So.
Can I ask you a question about the troops? Actually,
Sure.
2 questions.
Sure.
I guess as you came over as a unit, you were pretty much at table of organization strength?
Yes, I had 42 people in my platoon when I first started, and we were whittled down by attrition after the first night of combat at the first location. Most of the time, my platoon ran about 24 to 28 people.
Okay.
And we were organized usually in 3 squads with we originally carried some of our weapons were always the M16 rifle. We had 3 60 caliber M60 machine guns, 7.62 caliber machine guns, and then when we initially came, and even through the first part of our deployment into to the north, we had the 66 millimeter anti-tank light anti-tank weapon. And we still had the 90 millimeter recoilless rifle anti-tank, which was a really long tube firing piece of equipment. The rounds were almost as heavy as the weapon, but we had 2 90 millimeter recoilless rifles, and each of the 2 assistant gunners would carry 3 rounds each. That's about all I could carry. And the gunner would carry actually a round in the tube, flechette rounds in the tube. And we used those for through about mid-April, when we finally just gave them up as being just too unwieldy and not...
Was that on a Jeep, or did somebody...
No, we carried those. We packed them. So we would have 3 squads of about 6 to 8 men each, and then we would have a 4-man or 3-man unit that was the anti-tank, but they also, like I said, we had a lot of flechette rounds that we would carry for those and set them up on key avenues or approach, like a trail or something. We'd set that down the trail. A flechette round was a anti-tank round for these was a projectile with a long standoff to give a focused shape charge burn through through a piece of armor. And we didn't really have a lot of need for that, but they also made a round that was just like artillery from all the way back to the Civil War, was a small round with small nail-like affairs with small fins on them and just packed in several thousand or several hundred of them, more than 1,000, several hundred of them. So when you fired this, what you had was like a whole bunch of nails being fired out of the gun, which would wipe out anybody. A lot like a Claymore mine, but with small nail-like, with small dark fins on them.
Were your troops, was there a mix of enlistees and draftees, or?
Almost everybody was a draftee.
Okay.
Very few, there were some enlistees, but most of my people were draftees. One of the most telling features of what the Army was like at that time was when I joined the platoon, I was a second lieutenant and I was 22 years old. My platoon sergeant was in his late 30s, early 40s, Sergeant Williams, and we were the only 2 older people in the platoon. Everybody else was anywhere from, I won't say that, but everybody else's rank was either a private or a Spec 4, Specialist 4. And all of my squad leaders, including my, I actually had 4 squad leaders, and they were all what were known as shake and bakes. They were all E4s, had been to a crash course on leadership, and then awarded, they call them acting jacks, E5 stripes, but they were all, we referred to them as shake and bakes because of the new coding for chicken and stuff at the time that just come out. But that's exactly what they were. They were very instantaneous NCOs, and they were very good leaders in most cases. Very few people didn't stand up and do what needed to be done.
When you were what was the next area you moved to?
Well, we stayed in the Triple Nickel quite a bit. We had several actions in there. I was really only in combat for from the end of January through the end of March. It was my combat experience. But my platoon sergeant told me, he said he was there in 1965 with the 1st Brigade. He said during that entire 12 months he was there, they got into 2 good gunfights, as he called them, or that's what we referred to all of our contacts, our firefights, as good gunfights. But he got into 2 the whole time he was there. And in the time I was there, in about 2 months, we got in 6 good gunfights during that 2-month period.
And this was 68?
This was all 68,
Right.
January, February, March 68. Like I say, and because of Tet, there were a lot of NVA, North Vietnamese Army, as well as Viet Cong in the area. And in some cases, it made it a little easier to work in the area because things like the punji pits, the Viet Cong would have to uncover those because they're afraid their own troops, the NVA, would stumble into them. So we didn't have to worry quite as much about punji pits and booby traps as we would, although we did have problems with some of the booby traps. And two sort of vignettes come to mind on that was in one of them, the forward observer, FO, sergeant. Every platoon would have, or every company would have a lieutenant from the artillery and a sergeant from the artillery battery that was supporting him, or battalion that was supporting him, and they would do your forward observation for the guns. The NCO, the FO observer, was a really sharp E5, and he just was always on, could spot things that were going to happen or whatever. But one day he made a mistake. He went into every time you would go into a hooch area, a building that where the Vietnamese lived, usually consisted of a house. Because this was a war zone, they always had a bunker built in there, and then they would usually have a small fence around it with a gate at the front. And of course, you always avoided the gate. You would always go over the fence on one side or the other, and then because the gate could sometimes be booby trapped. This sergeant went over the fence, and my men were looking around the area. Then he came back, he was going to come back and do something, and he came back and just opened the gate, and it was booby-trapped with a grenade, and he was wounded and had to be evacuated. Another instance, though, we were was leading a night ambush patrol, about 2-squad ambush patrol, about 10, 12 people. And we came down through a dry rice paddy, rice field, and hit a hedge. One of my men stuck his looked under through the hedge and then checked the trail, and originally said, like, stuck his head back and said, "I think I see somebody." I said, "Are you sure, yes or no?" He says, "No, I wasn't sure, don't think so." So we eased out on the trail, put 2 people out for security left and right, and then the rest of us started coming out, and then we turned and went into this little village that was to the left, and there was a huge, basically it wasn't just a, punji pits were usually like maybe a foot square and were meant to catch your boot and catch one person. This was a huge, meant to catch a body, a person. It was about 6 or 8 feet long pit, about 3 to 4 feet wide, but it was uncovered because they were afraid people were moving around at night that would catch them. So we were able to move around that pit and move into the village. But as we were moving into the village, you've got to understand, it's absolutely dark, and all you're seeing are silhouettes and shades of dark and gray. And I can remember looking to my left about 10 feet away and seeing what looked like a door on the side of this house, and then the door's head moved one side just a little bit, and we fired quickly and engaged him. Did not hit him, but kind of scary to know that you have somebody that close to you. And sent the rest of the patrol back, kept about 4 people behind to see if we could catch anybody. Didn't catch anybody later that night. And we all went back into the logger position, the perimeter we set up every night. It was a night logger. And so on. But basically what we did was we would just work around and around our AO there to the east of Highway 1. And for that 2 months that I was really in combat there.
Did you have an Army of Vietnam soldier with you, or somebody to do interpreting?
No, we didn't. We had, the company did from time to time, but not always. And a lot of times we would just be pretty well on our own. Some people, if you spoke a little French, they spoke a little French, and you could do some common, but most of the time it was through gestures and that sort of thing.
And the phrases you pick up here and there.
Right. A couple of things we had, let's see. We would, like I said on the gunfights, a couple of vignettes I still remember from this. You always have some kind of things that now strike you as humorous, but at the time they may not have been, but make you smile. Remember getting a soldier from the aviation unit who was a machine gunner on a helicopter, and since he had machine gun experience, I put him on my machine gun. Of course, there was probably a reason they were trying to get rid of him, because he wasn't the greatest soldier in the world. The first night we put him on, he'd just been with us like a day or two, and so we were setting up in a village, and we had a rice paddy to our north with a little tailing piece of built-up area that went out, woods and things. Had an OP at the end of that, but because that was a fast avenue of approach in, that's where I put the machine gun. And I told the machine gunner, I believe his name was Russo, I told him, be sure to put up your limiting stake so you don't hit our OP out there. And the squad leader that he had the machine gun for came over to me and said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this." And I came over, and here he is, the gun, and I looked for Russo. He's nowhere to be found. Well, he's up about the 50 meters up at the end, nailing in this big 10-foot tall stake. And of course, that doesn't do you any good at night. What you're looking for is a piece of stake that, as your gun turns, it won't go any further than where you have it nailed in. So nailing it in up there did him absolutely no good. But that's what he thought my limiting stake meant. And so okay, let me explain the basics of infantry operations here to you. And so we took him off the gun, and eventually he's just carrying an M16. And we got into a fight, and I remember we had 2 or 3 people behind a haystack. We were in a looked like World War II. It really did. A stucco house, no roof, bombed out, haystack behind it, square village area kind of thing. The company was on line, bad guys were on the north side, a couple of guys were behind this haystack, and we were in the windows of this house, bombed out house, literally firing back and forth at him. And we'd fire through a magazine. Magazine held 20 rounds, and the way you would do that is you had your load carrying equipment shoulder straps held up the belt, and you had your belt fastened at the front, but you would open your shirt, and as you fired your magazines up, you didn't replace them in your magazine pouch. You would take your empty magazines and simply throw them inside your shirt. And the way they resupplied you was with a stripper clip that would then go into your magazines that you carried. So the squad I was with, we were fighting with these two guys and the rest of the line up there, and we fired up 5 or 6 magazines each into that, and everybody carried 8 magazines, and so we'd fired up 5 or 6, and so then the company commander called and said, pull back, we're going to put, as we always did, usually when we get in a fight, if it lasted more than a few minutes, we would immediately start to pull back, cordon the area, and put air and artillery on top of it, and then we'd go back in and see what was left. If we got a lot of resistance, we'd pull back and put more air and artillery into it. Well, he said pull back, so everybody pull back. And my platoon sergeant brought up the resupply ammunition. That's usually what they would do, and then we would start to reload magazines and get ready to go back if we had to go back and do other things. And so we turned to Russo and say, here's the bandolier of stripper clips, reload your magazines. He says, but I just dropped all mine on the ground there. And so now everybody had to give Russo one of their magazines, so he would have some magazines to reload into. But one of those things that makes you smile now, but at the time, it's not as easy sometimes as you think. Everybody understands how you're supposed to do business there and things. So, but
What about the monsoon season?
well, I hated the monsoon season. I don't think I really had to experience it, but when it rained over there, you got to understand, I have really bad eyesight, and so at the time I was wearing the big, thick black glasses and so on with a sports strap on the back of it. And that was one of my biggest fears, was losing or having my glasses broken over there. I always carried 3 extra pair in my rucksack. I carried 1 pair in my pocket, 2 pair in my rucksack, and I wore 1 pair with like I say, the glasses strap on them. But when it rained, especially if it was a really misting rain, it was really hard to see out of these things. You spend all your time, even with your muddy hands, up there trying to clean those glasses off so you could see what was going on. And I really hated it when it rained. But I don't think we really had the monsoon season while I was in there. I was there in the spring, and I think the monsoon season was actually during the summer and early fall. So I didn't have to experience too much of that while I was in the field. I was very lucky.
When you say you were with the platoon for 2 months or something like that, and what happened after that?
Well, we had a couple other things while I was with the platoon. We crammed a lot in those 2 months. Before I leave those, what happened? During the time I was there, a couple of things. Let's see. We would do because the MVA was there. The idea was that you would try to find them, and the way we would do that was through combat assaults. So every day consisted usually of usually at least 2, sometimes 3, maybe 4 combat assaults, where the helicopters would come in, pick you up, and then drop you down in near a village, and then you would immediately sweep through the village and see if you found anybody in the village. That was always a kind of a nerve-wracking thing, because if the helicopters are coming in, that's your most vulnerable. As the helicopters approach to land, they would have to flare, and then when they'd set down, either just touch their skids down or hover slightly, and that's when you would jump out, and you were at your most vulnerable right then, because you were in a group, and if anybody was going to take you under fire, that was probably when you were going to have a problem. I never had a problem like that, except for one time, and it was actually, we led the combat assault. My platoon was on the first wave of helicopters, first serial in the morning, and we touched down, and everything was fine for that combat assault, so I didn't have to. I was relegated to the second wave in the afternoon, and the first platoon under my friend Frank Giles was leading the combat assault into the LZ for this village that we had on the second combat assault of the day in the afternoon. And I can remember they put Giles' crew down, and they called back. It was a cold LZ, which means we got no fire, and so that was fine. And our helicopters, we'd had actually 2 flights. So our helicopters were already in the air. They didn't have to come back and pick us up. They dropped Giles off, and our helicopters started in. And as soon as our helicopters touched down in this dry rice paddy, we jumped off, and immediately the place lit up as they started firing at these helicopters that were taking off. They actually were flying off to the east, and there was regional forces, popular forces, an old French fort compound. It had blockhouses, had a house in the center, had trench lines around it, had barbed wire around it, and they were firing from inside that compound and were firing into the bellies of the helicopters, so they were taking a beating. Then they were firing at us, who were in this open rice paddy with rice stalks about this big, and that's all between us and them. We were about 10 feet from the trench line, and I can still remember the little Vietnamese with his brown arm is all you'd see. He wouldn't stick his head up. He would just put his arm up with his AK and spray the area in front of us. And then so we immediately engaged him, and we're back in a fight. And we started trading grenades back and forth. And one of the grenades came out and exploded behind the FO, the forward observer. And I can still remember he was wearing a vest with his poncho liner stuffed in the back of the vest. So the shards that went in were hot, and the vest was smoldering. The poncho liner was not burning, but it was smoldering from the hot shards that had hit his back. So we were still throwing grenades at this guy and shooting at him with our M16s, and I'm trying to pull this guy back, and we're backpedaling, trying to get away from him. And my friend Lieutenant Giles was inside the compound, and one, either he or his RTO had been caught right in the middle of this, and I remember one of them must have, I don't know if it was the RTO or Giles, stuck his head up or sort of sat up in the middle of the fight, and it was just, you could see that he got hit from either our fire or their fire. I wasn't sure which, but he got killed that day during that fight. And, as a matter of fact, I lasted 2 months, and I was the last original platoon leader in the unit to be taken out of the field. Everybody else had turned over by that time. And there were, in my infantry officer basic class, like I say, they rushed us through kind of with distinguished military graduates. Of that class, 5 of us went to the same battalion. Scott and Rodriguez to A Company, Bill Old to B Company, Richter to Charlie Company, and me to D Company. And I was the last of those 5 to be, we always call it being blown out of the field. I was the last to be blown out of the field, and I lasted 30 or 60 days. So Scott and Rodriguez got killed, Old got wounded, and eventually came back and ran what's called the preparatory school back at Benoit. Richter got wounded, and I think wound up being medically discharged from the Army. So it's not a healthy place to be a platoon leader in 1968 in Vietnam. So, but I did have some success. One of the successes was it all kind of goes together. As I said, we would roll around this AO, and during the day you would sweep through villages, and then at night you would log her up by pulling a perimeter in, and you'd set your perimeter. You might dig shallow holes or pile something up as protection. Then a log bird would come in and usually bring you hot food for the night, or bring in, and if you had hot food at night, sometimes they would leave the cooks there who would then cook you breakfast in the morning on the griddles and stuff. Then you always rate C-rations during the daytime, and carry C-rations, usually they were cans, and you would always take a sock, and you would just put the C-rations in your sock, and then tie them on your web gear, and then tie it down, so that was what you had for your meals and stuff as you went through this. But we loggered up in this one base camp, and then there were old buildings in there that had been burned down, but they still had their bunkers. So after we'd already set the perimeter, they decided they better check the bunkers, and they sent a guy with a 45 and no gear, just a 45. He went into this bunker. Now, once you've gone into these things, were elongated, and they were kind of mounded, and just a lot of dirt. And there was a small, narrow piece that went back in them, and maybe a sitting area on the side, so the Vietnamese people could get in there and avoid being, bombs or whatever that were coming over. So this guy went in with his 45, checked it out. There was nothing in there, but there was a bamboo stake with a wicker piece of bamboo at the back, and he went back to check behind that, and as he grabbed that and started rattling it, AK rounds went right past his ear. So he backpedals out of there as fast as he can, and so it seems like now we have a VC in the middle of our perimeter in this bunker, and he would stick his hand up and out and spray the backside of our line. He's spraying the backside of it with AK fire. So we told everybody, keep your heads down. He wasn't very accurate because he would actually sort of shoot up in the air. But now we had to get this guy out of there. So we're trying everything we can think of. We're trying to throw a grenade into it, and that doesn't seem to be dislodging. We're trying to, finally somebody says, well, let's use a smoke grenade in there, and that will smoke him out. And so we throw the smoke grenade in. Of course, now there's billows of smoke. All of a sudden, the guy jumps up, and he runs out of this, and he's running for the perimeter from the inside. And everybody's just looking at him going like, we can't believe this. Two guys are sitting there eating their C-ration, or eating their meal at night, and the guy ran right past them. I can remember the first sergeant yelling, shoot him, shoot him. These guys went, what? Then they get on this machine gun, and they start shooting at the guy. Well, he's zigzagging out there. He jumps down behind a berm, and he's gone. The thing I remember that makes it so interesting, he had a blue shirt on, real, short, black shorts, and this kind of navy blue shirt on. But it's amazing that the guy was able to get away. Well, that night I had to send out I had to take an ambush patrol out. We took an ambush patrol out and set up in a graveyard, and set up on with claymore mines. Claymores were shaped mines that were pieces of explosive that fired ball bearings out, and they were meant from Korea to stop human wave attacks. But they were used to really put a lot of firepower out at one time. So you would put your claymore up. It had a couple of little metal legs that you would stick into the ground. It was slightly curved, and of course, just to make sure that everybody has a thing that says this side toward enemy. And then you would put an explosive cap in it and roll a wire, which is just like electrical cord, back out. And then you would have what's called a clicker, which was a generator that you would connect to, just plug in. And sure enough, that night during the middle of the night, we had two guys came down along the trail, and we went ahead and fired the clicker on them and killed the two Vietnamese, and then lit the area up with artillery to see what we were doing as we went out to search the people. And one of the guys was wearing black shorts, blue shirt. So he may have gotten out during the afternoon, but he didn't make it through the night. So we think it was the same guy, but not sure. There was one other one where we'd had the same firefight where I mentioned the magazines with the guy. A couple of days later, apparently they were back in the same area, and we were ambushing, but we were coming up from the south, and we'd ambushing on the other side of a creek bed, but I was ambushing facing the south, and didn't know there was anybody to the north. And I can remember during the middle of the night, my ambush was faced south, and we had night vision devices. We looked through the night vision devices, and there was a bamboo footbridge, and we could see people crossing the footbridge. So we had to sort of quickly move people around, engage them, and we were at about 100 meters, so weren't very effective, didn't kill anybody on that one. It would have been nice to know the bridge was there and that there were people up there from the intel reports. I had to actually go out with a brigade commander and explain to him why I hadn't hit anybody on that ambush that night. So the 60 days in the field were pretty exciting. Went very quickly. Oh yeah, very, very quickly. Okay, any other? Well, you said what do we do after? Well, it turned out that towards the end of February only had 28 days. I was pretty lucky, but any day that had more than 28 days in it, I had a problem because I got hit on the night of the 30th, 31st of January. So the day of the 30th of March, we were sweeping the area, and not my platoon, but another platoon sent a guy into a village, the point man. And walking point was a very dangerous thing to do. In this case, the point man approached the village and was engaged by Vietnamese who killed him. And so we backed off and immediately put air and artillery on the village, and had done that for a day. And now it was time to go in and see what we had in the village. Well, the village had a tailing piece of wooded area that came back, and there was a graveyard and the Vietnamese had mounded graves, and then sometimes the mounded graves would also have a little fenced area around them and a small wall, and then there would be rice paddies then out from that. So we were coming in by way of this graveyard, and they had positions in the graveyard, so we engaged them. And I was fighting with one of my squads that we were trading grenades back and forth with a group of people. I did lose a man that day. He was doing everything exactly right. He was down, but the Vietnamese had a line of sight on him and actually shot him while he was laying prone, and actually was able to hit him and kill him. So we continued to move until we thought we had him moved out of the graveyard, and pushed past him. One of my guys actually jumped up in what's called an RPD, small light machine gun. He, as they were changing the belt, he actually assaulted their position, and company commander was getting ready to put him in for a Silver Star, I think. I don't know, because we were, as I came back and reported that we pushed him out of the graveyard and were holding the graveyard. And at that time, they put 60 millimeter mortar fire on us, indirect fire, and it hit my people up front, and got about 6 or 7 wounded from that. And my RTO and I were coming back from where the company commander's position was to the front, and we got hit by mortar fire. My RTO got hit in the neck with a shard. I got hit in the back of the left thigh with a shard, like somebody taking a baseball bat and just whacking my leg. And so got all my people. We got medevacs for the people that need the medevacs. And then, but my RTO and I were still there, and they decided the night was coming in, we wouldn't medevac us till the next day, that we weren't critical. So we stayed in the logger that night. Interesting about that logger, they sent, they had a new platoon leader who came in for 3rd Platoon. I think his name was Brownlee, and they sent him out to ambush along a dike. And sure enough, guys tried to come out that dike at night, so they fired them up, and they wounded one guy. And one of the people was going to shoot the guy that was wounded, and the platoon sergeant came over and knocked his gun up and said, "No, we're going to take him prisoner." Threw him back over his shoulder, dragged him in. They basically just threw this guy on the ground, a Viet Cong, not NVA, threw him on the ground, threw a poncho over him, and guarded him for the night. The next morning, when before the logger came in, it was real foggy, so the logger didn't come in until about mid-morning. But the guy woke up, he sits up and throws the poncho off and motions he'd like a cigarette, so we gave him a cigarette. Then we had the medic come over and check him, and sure enough, he had 2 bullet holes in his side that hadn't been patched, and he just lived all night with these bullet holes. They patched him up. So Viet Cong were tough little people that you had to worry about. And, but anyway, I was medevac that day, and I thought it was going to be sort of like the first one, where I just go back, be treated, and return. They sent me to the, I believe it was the 22nd Surge Surgical Hospital at Phubai. They prepped me, they debrided the wound, basically cut my leg so it was open, put a bandage on it, and decided that I was going to be medevac down to the 92nd evac down at Da Nang. Moved there by C-130 from Phubai, and then was, because they need the hospital space because they're getting ready for a push into the Ashal Valley, they decided they were going to medevac us all out of country. So moved from there through the Philippines, spent one night in the Philippines, and moved to the, I think it was either 106 or 108 General Hospital at Yokohama, Japan. And so I had my wound treated there in the hospital. Interesting story about that. I've been walking around after I was in bed for about a week or so, and was able to hobble around on crutches. Still hadn't had my sutures, removed. Saw a doctor in the hallway and said, "Aren't you my doctor?" And he says, "Are you my patient?" I went, "Yeah." He says, "Are you supposed to take these sutures?" He goes, "Oh, hadn't I taken those out yet? Well, come over here and I'll take this." So you sort of get lost in the system there. But first month was sort of non-ambulatory, couldn't leave the ward. Second month, during the month of May, I was able to get out and see a little bit of Japan, which is fairly nice. June, they decided it was time to go back to Vietnam, so I got reassigned back to Vietnam, and reassigned this time to the Division Headquarters Company. And because the real Division Headquarters Company XO was at Benoit, and Division Headquarters Company was at Camp Eagle, they assigned me as the Assistant XO Division Headquarters Company Forward at Camp Eagle. So I did all the duties that XO does: mess hall, property book, motor pool, etc., of the Division Headquarters Company for the 101st at Camp Eagle. And that's basically with the rest of my tour from June through December. Did get an R&R to Hawaii, had an R&R that came up for someone, he couldn't use it, so I was able to take a leave and go to Hawaii for 1 week. And so those are 2 nice interludes in that remaining 6-month period. And then came back in December of '68 and was reassigned to the Florida Ranger Camp as a Ranger instructor.
So you came back as an individual, unit stayed, but you rotated?
All the units, yes, all the units stayed in Vietnam, and individuals rotated. Once the division went in as a unit, unlike what we're doing right now in Iraq, where we're rotating units, that was, again, being part of the Division Headquarters Company, that was going to be a major factor for the division. But their attrition had been such that new people had come in during that time as replacements. And so they didn't have everybody leaving exactly at once, but it was a major factor that we're having a lot of people leave and at the end of the tour. Because two brigades, like I say, almost 8,000 or 9,000 people had come over together. They were very concerned that there was going to be a mass exodus, and they wanted people to extend. I didn't want to extend, but because I had some questions at that time about whether to get out of the Army or not.
So you were, what was the assignment when you came back?
Ranger instructor at the Florida Ranger
Okay.
Camp. And I was what they call an RI, Ranger instructor.
When you came back, so that was the early part of '69.
Right, January '69, I was assigned to Florida. Spent 18 months in Florida.
What was the reaction of the locals down there too? I mean, I know you were at a military installation, but I mean.
Well, Florida and the South in general was pretty. They weren't as much anti-war, and I didn't experience nearly the anti-war hoopla. My parents met me at the airport with my sister and some. I was kind of embarrassed by that, but most everybody else, it was kind of like just, okay, another day of another soldier coming home kind of thing. I didn't experience any of the animosity, and especially down in Florida, stationed on Eglin Air Force Base, which is where we were originally stationed at Field 7 and moved to Field 6 while I was down there. Florida Ranger Camp. And in Northwest Florida is a pretty pro-military section of the country. So
When you during 1968, during the time you were in country, did you have any idea of what was going on back in the States or in any?
Not that much. It wasn't like it is now. You don't get no TV, you had Armed Forces radio there, but not to the extent you have now. And so everything you came with Stars and Stripes was your only how you would read about what was going on in the world. So of course that's slanted to the military, of course. So the protests and stuff that were going on were. And you got to remember the culture I came from. I came from a military school, into the military, and then was assigned to a Northwest Florida military base. We would see it on TV, my wife and I, and it's almost like being somewhere else. Kent State and all those things that were happening were almost, we didn't quite understand all of that, why there was that much, because this is what the civilian government wanted us to do, and that's what the military was prosecuting the war. So it's kind of like, wait a minute, don't quite get this. Why are these people not supporting this?
In the last few minutes here in the interview, can you give us a quick summary of the rest of your military career?
Okay, I was, after Ranger School, went to Infantry Officer Advanced, which is about a 9-month course. Several of us from Ranger Department in Florida were there at the same time. Was then assigned to California, to Fort Ord. Worked for a few months in the training directorate there before getting a training company. Had a training company in the 2nd Brigade there, and kept that for a little over a year. Gave that up, went back to the training directorate for a few more months. Was assigned from there to the Defense Language Institute to initially study Thai, but that assignment went away, so I wound up studying Spanish for 6 months at DLI. That assignment didn't materialize as I came back. That had been changed, so I wound up as the next assignment was as the Assistant 3 Operations Officer in the School Brigade at Fort Benning. That's the brigade that has the Infantry Officer Basic, Airborne, etc. So we worked in the School Brigade for 18 months and then was assigned back to the Ranger Department and spent another 18 months in the Ranger Department, this time at Fort Benning. Ran Camp Darby, which is the small camp at the initial phase of Ranger School on Fort Benning, and then was the Assistant 3 and 3, worked as the Operations Officer for a short period of time under Colonel Sidnor in the Ranger Department. From there was assigned to Northeast Region Recruiting Command, 4 fun-filled years at Fort Meade, Maryland, at a time when we were changing to the high school graduate-only kind of program, and that was probably one of the most taxing assignments I had in the Army. After that, was assigned to the 44th Military History Detachment at Fort McPherson, Georgia, only active military history detachment in the inventory. There are Guard and Reserve military history detachments, but 44th is the main active one. And then from there went to, was assigned as a GLOW ground liaison officer in Korea with the 25th Tactical Fighter Squadron, an A-10 squadron in Korea. Came back to Fort McPherson to work in Forces Command in the Joint Training or Joint Exercises part of Exercises Division under G3, and then retired in June of 1988, 21 years military service. And then went back to work for ForceCom about 6 months later, and been there for 18 years. Again, doing joint and combined exercises, primarily with Joint Forces Command in Norfolk.
You brought some items with you, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to show us them.
Not too many. This was mostly a couple of things here real quick. Mostly to jog my memory and remind me. One thing I did get, I did kind of proud of the fact that I got a Bronze Star with a V. Got 2 Purple Hearts. I didn't need both of those Purple Hearts. One would have done. For the Bronze Star with a V, that was a write-up for that. I mentioned the fight where we're with close in on the where Lieutenant Giles was killed. This and you can't see the map, very small, but area where we worked was north of Hue and south of Quang Tri, and to the east of Highway 1. Again, like I said, the area known as Highway 555.
Can you see that?
This is good.
Do you want to just...
Sure. Okay. And I'll refer to this one just a little bit. A couple of the places that I was in this were LZ Jane, which I believe is right down here, and then LZ Sally, which is right down here. And then eventually I came back, as I said, my second part of the tour was at Camp Eagle, which was down south of Hue. This is Hue, this is Quang Tri. The area where I spent most of my combat time was in this area right about in here, just to the east of and south of Quang Tri, near LZ Jane. This is Jane right here. And let's see, what else do I have here? Couple of small maps that show the... I pulled these off the internet. You're welcome to these if you want to keep these. This shows where some of these fire bases and so on are. This is another one that shows where the different fire bases are. LZ Sally, LZ Jane, etc.
All right, we'll take
Sure.
those.
Sure.
And,
I would like to hang on to this.
You go ahead and hang on to that. We've got that on film.
Sure.
We'll keep these in the file, though, and we'll make a copy of this also.
And I brought some photos. I'll just talk about those separately. Just at one time, I wasn't nearly as fat as I am now. Was a fairly skinny guy when I was in the 101st. So I don't know. I had a lot of good living in between there. So
I was reminiscing when you were talking about the LeBlanc frame glasses, the no sex glasses.
yeah, exactly. You used to call them anti-rape glasses. Exactly. Okay. Can I answer any other questions, or does that tell you anything? That was 68 was a very lively year.
Yeah,
and,
it was.
And so was.
What was, I guess, in summary, the best and the worst of
Well, the best was always
tour?
the people. People were always good to work with, and you had a sense of purpose. You knew what you were doing with the people. As long as you tried to take care of your people, you were in good shape. The worst were we had a lot of friendly fire incidents, and I won't say a lot because I think that's something that goes with the territory in any war. I think you're always going to have that, and those are the saddest incidents. And I do remember one where I had an OP out in front of my area. Another platoon sent an ambush patrol out. My people were out 50 meters. They were supposed to go out 500 meters. They sort of got lost and wandered around. They wound up sitting right down in front of my OP, who reported contact, blew their claymores, killed one of the people, who immediately reported they'd been counter-ambushed, etc. But killed one of our own people just because they didn't read the map well, didn't do their skills well, and as a result, we had a loss of a human life. And it's just that was very sad to have that happen. But that war is a dangerous thing, and the lethality of the other guy is only matched by the lethality of our own arms. So you have to be really, really careful and keep your head up all the time about what's going on with the AO. But truly, except for being scared out of my mind a couple of times, for most of the time I felt very confident in our leaders, felt very confident in our soldiers, and felt like we were doing what we were sent there to do.
Well, we appreciate your service. Want to thank you for coming in and sharing it with us. Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate
It
it.
was a pleasure.
Okay, these are just a few pictures I brought. This is what I used to look like once upon a time, if that's on the camera there. Holding a rifle. A few other pictures there are, oops, okay, that one's off. I don't know if you can get any of those others. I'm going to flip it over in just a second. This is around Hue. This is what the area looked like. I took these pictures when we were trucking up from Fubai to our position there at LZ Jane on the 30th of January. What always amazed me are the women with their the traditional dress, yeah. Okay. I'm going to take that one down. This is area around Camp Eagle. Not sure why that one's turned. Myself and First Sergeant Henderson with the division headquarters company there, and then just scenes of Camp Eagle. It's one of those things you just sort of never forget. I'm going to turn this sideways because the other photo down here that's sideways on it. That's a picture of the day they invaded the Ashow Valley. There was just a stream of about 20 CH-47s all in staggered trail, and you don't see that many CH-47s moving together at any one time, and that was just amazing to me to see that kind of air armada taking people into the Ashow. Okay, and that's about all I can hold up. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.